Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Cupertino, welcome to the Quinlan Center, and welcome to the 2019 State of the City Address. We'll really appreciate you being here. I think this afternoon there was a small taste of what we have to come for the following year, and I think it's exciting. There's a lot of good initiatives that the city has to work on and the community has to work on. We're going to work on them together. And so with that, I'm just going to quickly turn it over to Mayor Steven Scharf.
So I wanted to go over some of the things that happened this morning's or this afternoon's State of the City speech before Rotary and Chamber. We did give several awards. One was to a deputy who has written the most traffic tickets of any deputy in Santa Clara County. And it didn't seem like a lot to me. He said, I write 850 a year, but then I think that's not even 3 a day. And I thought he could do better. Maybe 850 a week at least. We could do that just around some of the schools. And then they also gave an award, a star award to Paul and Eddie's. Who here has been to Paul and Eddie's? So Paul and Eddie's is a bar on Stevens Creek near the post office. And I was telling them that when I worked in Cupertino around 1983 at this company called Timeshare, which had offices on Bubb Road and Valley Green, one day I was looking for one of my coworkers. I needed him to sign something to send a PC board out. I said, "Where's Sid? I can't find him anywhere." And they said, oh, he's in a meeting over in Building P. I said, "Building P?" And I'm looking at the map and I said, "There is no Building P here. What are you talking about?" They said, "Oh, no, Paul and Eddie's. That's where he always is at 2 o'clock in the afternoon with his coworkers." So I'm going to get started here. Hopefully this is working. So we have a lot of things coming up in our city that are of a lot of importance to people. And this is a few of them. I'm not going to read my PowerPoint slides because I've admonished other staff not to do that. So you can just look at those. And I think the last one, fixing council meetings, is one of my priorities. I don't like council meetings that go till 2 a.m. And I think we can do better and find a way to shorten those. So here, this is one of my proposals this year. You've heard about the wall along our southern border. This is the wall around Cupertino. We have a big problem with all these Teslas coming through our city from Saratoga and other people from other cities. So we came up with this proposal. San Jose will be mainly paying for it. So it's not going to come out of our own taxes. Saratoga will give a little bit too, since they really are a big contributor to our traffic issue. So speaking of traffic, a few days ago I got an email from an 8th grader at Kennedy Middle School complaining he can't ride his bike to school because here on Hyannisport Drive, the cars are creating 2 lanes where there's really only 1 lane, and the bikes have no place to go. You can see the bike here. He's riding on the crosswalk and eventually he'll go on the sidewalk. On the left, someone jumping out of their car in the middle of the street. You can't see the bike that was coming down that could have been hit by the door opening of that car. So I really would like that deputy to do even more around our schools in terms of traffic. You know, we complain about the way people drive, but these are all the parents taking their kids to school. There's really no excuse for endangering the pedestrians and the cyclists. And this is some of the bad behavior that we're seeing, not just around schools, but the red light running and the blocking the bicycle lanes, blocking intersections. So I'm hoping we can meet with the sheriff and have him do a little more enforcement in these areas. Next, I was at the League of Cities New Mayors Conference in Sacramento a week and a half ago, and they were talking about the need to have a really clean general plan because of all the legislation that's coming down from Sacramento. So we really have got to go through our general plan, look at every single parcel, make sure we have objective standards for every single piece of land in the city, so someone can't come in and say, "Hey, there's no height limit here. I can I can build 100 stories if I want. We also need to make sure all the maps in the general plan are fixed. There's a lot of inaccuracies, and because of the state legislation, this is vitally important that we do this. And housing, we all hear about housing and the housing shortage, especially affordable housing. This is what the Apple campus would look like if they were able to house all 13,000 employees that will eventually be on that campus. You would need all those high-rise buildings, and obviously that is not going to happen. The workers come from wherever they choose to live. We can't actually force a worker to live where we tell them to. It just doesn't work that way. So in 2015, before I was on the council, we did our RHNA, Regional Housing Needs Allocation, and unlike some cities in the state, we met our RHNA allocation. We exceeded it by about 40%. So where is all that housing? It's now about 4 years later. Is it under construction? Is it almost done? No. There's one project, the Veranda on Stevens Creek, which is 19 units of senior housing, that's almost done. The other 1,400 or so units, some of them, they've been approved, but they haven't taken out permits. Some of them we don't even have plans for yet. So we get attacked a lot, say, why do you have all this housing, all these jobs and no housing? But we're trying. We met our legal obligation for RHNA to do the allocation. We have to find a way to get these developers to actually build the housing that they asked for. They come and ask for entitlements, and we say, okay, here it is, but we don't have any good way of forcing them to actually construct the housing they asked for. So here's one example. This is over by Apple, the Hamptons. They were granted 600 more units to add to their 342 for a total of 942. And this happened several years ago. And I asked one of the employees of Irvine Company that owns this project, well, what's happening? Well, the economy, we're worried there'll be a recession and job losses. And then we tear down 342 units. We get no rent at all for about 2 years while the new project is being built. And she's also concerned about the high construction costs. But when they take the allocation, they really need to think about this in advance. And they need to be committed to build this housing that they asked for. Now, this is ELI housing for developmentally disabled. This has come to our attention a lot in the last year. And we really need a way to do this. All of us probably know somebody, a family that's affected by this, a developmentally disabled adult living with their parents because there's not enough supportive housing for them. Now, this is a picture of a project in Minneapolis, St. Paul, a 45-unit apartment building, and it was funded by a philanthropic organization, the Jewish Housing and Programming, UHOP, and it was done by them, but it's open to all faiths. And you look around Silicon Valley, this is probably the wealthiest area in the world. We have just got to find a way to find the funds to build this kind of housing. We really owe it to the people of our community to do this. So I'm really hoping to move forward with something like this and find a way to get this done and just stop talking about it. Now, who here has heard about CASA? Wow, this is actually more than some elected officials in Sacramento when we ask the same question from the Bay Area, and they really should know about it in the Bay Area. So I call it it's called the Committee to House the Bay Area, but I really call it the Committee to Destroy the Bay Area. So what is it? It's 10 elements intended to drive state legislation on housing. And the principles and where the funding is coming from is very scary. They want to come into smaller cities and take away some of our property tax revenue to fund this. Now in Cupertino, we're fortunate financially, we're very conservative, we're doing pretty well, but this could really hurt some cities that are right on the edge, that are struggling with their pension obligations and with other expenses. So these are not laws, these are proposals that will drive legislation. So the smaller cities in the Bay Area really need to get together. So there's 101 cities in the Bay Area. There were 4 cities involved with the drafting of the CASA Compact. The 3 big ones, San Francisco, Oakland, and San Jose, and then for some reason Rohnert Park up in, I guess that's in Sonoma County. The other 97 got no input into the whole process, although they will be the most affected by it. And our vice mayor was running some numbers yesterday, and if you look at how they're getting the funding for this and how much they're getting from corporations, which is about $4 million, and look at the square foot rate that are being charged and do the calculations, they're talking 40 million square feet of office per year, 200,000 workers per year, this is all additional, and you'd need 133,000 housing units to house all those people, but they're only proposing 35,000 housing units a year. So we're greatly worsening the housing situation, which drives up the costs, it lessens affordability, and it really causes the exact opposite of what the people behind CASA claim that they want to do. There was just a study I read today from MIT that was looking at the cost of high-density housing. They said, oh, it's actually, it drives up prices enormously because it makes the land so much more valuable. And it's just a myth that if we build really tall buildings, suddenly all the prices will come down. It hasn't worked that way anywhere in the world, in Hong Kong or New York or Tokyo. We really have to start not falling for the false rhetoric that we're being presented with. Now on to something we all love. Is our librarian here again? Oh, stand up. Don't be shy, Claire. Love embarrassing Claire. Okay. So we have some challenges with our library. Here's the parking lot. Not really, but it looks like that sometimes. Probably the second most question I get behind what's happening with Valco is, can we have more parking at the library? It's very difficult to do that. Parking garages are extremely expensive. I think it's $40,000 per space for an above-ground garage, $80,000 per space for underground. And inside, we have the same problem with not enough space. And we're one of the only libraries in the county, we don't have a dedicated program room. So they use community hall when it's available, but really we need to add on to the library. When it was built, I thought they should have made it bigger to start with. It wasn't even twice as big as our old library. So there's a couple of ideas. We can add on to the existing building. There's some proposals to do that. Or when we build the new city hall eventually, we can move the council chambers back to city hall where they used to be, and that community hall can be used much more by the library, as I understand was the original intention. There's some debate on what was originally proposed, but my understanding was community hall was primarily going to be for use by the library. For parking, we could increase the hours, which we're planning to do. We got a bunch of money from the county that's coming, and instead of backfilling what we're now paying to extend the hours, we could extend the hours even more. I proposed 24/7, but the Santa Clara County Library said that really wasn't something they were interested in doing. Also for parking, really we should encourage biking to the library. I know some teens have had their bikes stolen from out in front of the library, so maybe the city could fund some bicycle lockers like they have at train stations and other places, so people would feel more comfortable about riding their bikes. And getting to the library, if we can build the proposed bike paths and bike trails, that would also encourage people not to drive there. And then one of my pet peeves, which we don't have control over, but I see all the time, when I go to the library, it's being used a lot by private tutors that are charging money to their students, and they're taking up a lot of space in the library. And so you see teenagers sitting on the stairs doing their studying because so many tables are taken up by these for-profit entities. So I would love to change that, but it's not really up to the city. The library would have to decide if that's an appropriate use. And money, the proposed Hamptons project was supposed to have $7 million for a program room or other buildings at the library and civic center. But since that's on hold, we don't have that money. We're going to have to come up with that money from other sources. I don't think we can wait another 5 years before we proceed on a program room. Resident engagement. I was one of the founding leads on Nextdoor for my neighborhood, but I got kicked off. I finally got back on when I was elected to the city council, but there's a lot of people that have been kicked off because there are people up at Nextdoor that don't like what they say about certain subjects. So I would like the city to look into funding a platform where residents can engage. There's one called OpenGov. It's not that much, and it would allow the city to communicate with residents and residents to communicate with each other about important issues. And now the Public Works Acting Director is not here, so I'll praise Tim for this. Who knows what PCI stands for? Wow, nobody. I didn't know either. I couldn't even spell PCI when I started. So it's Pavement Condition Index. It's how good our streets are. And we are really good. 84 out of 100 is in the very good category. If you go to San Jose, Tim, I think they're in the 60s, and you really notice that you can drive south on Blaney, cross Bollinger into San Jose, and you can just feel it in your car as the pavement deteriorates. And it's really good to have good pavement because you don't get as many blowouts or flat tires. It's nicer to drive. And that's one of the functions of a city, is to keep the streets paved. And hoping we can get to 100, but Tim said all our streets would be like bowling alleys, that smooth. If we got to 100, there might not even be enough friction for your tires. And we almost done with an assessment of our city-owned water system. We leased that out to San Jose Water. It's up in the Monte Vista area. And we really wanted to know what we have up there in terms of the condition of all the infrastructure as we go into lease negotiations to see what we're going to do with that system going forward, whether we operate it ourselves, lease it again to San Jose Water, or lease it to somebody else. On bicycle plan, we're moving forward with that. The Unepro Serra Trail, which is actually along a drainage ditch along 280, kind of from near the Mary Avenue Bridge going east over, I think it will end where, at Tantal or before. So that's moving forward. And then our Regnart Creek Trail plan's moving forward as well. So Cupertino, we've kind of had a target on our back for a year or so. We've been attacked rather unfairly, and we are going to start doing a better job. We've engaged the services of a public relations person who's going to start putting out our side of the story on various issues. For RENA, I mentioned we've entitled 140% of our RENA allocation, yet we're constantly attacked. You know, Cupertino is not building enough housing. Well, we want to. We have way more entitled than we actually were required to by the Association of Bay Area Governments. So we really need to get our side out. It was like, we don't actually build the housing. The landowners build the housing, and we can't force them to. This is the same slide as before. So a lot of people have been criticizing us. They say, hey, Apple added 13,000 new jobs. Well, no, they didn't. So did anyone here work at HP back when they were on that campus where Apple is now? I've heard reports of between 9,800 and 12,000 employees on that site. And Apple is going to put about 13,000 there. So it's not a huge increase when we tore down all those old buildings and put in the much nicer Apple spaceship and the associated buildings. But if you listen to some political leaders from San Jose and Oakland, you keep hearing how we added 13,000 additional jobs. And even those 13,000 jobs weren't new. Most of them came from existing Apple facilities elsewhere in Cupertino and throughout the Bay Area. So another thing we're looking into is legislative action in getting some lobbyists. I was talking to a San Jose city councilman about 2 weeks ago. He said, we have 2 lobbyists full-time in Sacramento promoting the interests of San Jose. And at this mayor's meeting of the West Valley mayors, which is Saratoga, Campbell, Monte Sereno, Cupertino, and I say Saratoga. So it's five cities. We were talking about getting together and sharing a lobbyist sharing the expense among the 5 cities. And I think we're going to try to move forward on this because a lot of the issues we face are similar in those cities. Not exactly the same, but close enough that we could collaborate and share that expense. Fortunately or unfortunately, unlike corporate lobbyists, we can't show up to a legislator's office with a satchel of money and say, take this for your campaign and please do what we say. We actually can only say, do this because the voters will like this and they'll vote for you again. And sometimes they don't even care. They know they will never lose. If they're a Democrat in a safe seat, they really don't have anything to worry about. But it could have some effect on how they vote on certain bills and what bills they propose. So we've all heard of the corporate lobbying organizations, Silicon Valley Leadership Group and Bay Area Council, but finally we're starting to get some regional and statewide lobbying groups that are lobbying on behalf of cities. And one of those is called Livable California. I've been to several of their meetings, and we just had a meeting last week, or maybe it was earlier this week, what I call the Bay Area Leadership Council. And it was a meeting of several mayors and council people from Bay Area cities to talk about how we move forward, especially in light of all these housing bills coming forward from the legislature. There's also another group. I went to one meeting once called the 9 County Coalition, which has some similarities with our goals. So finances, we're still financially stable. We worry about pension costs like every city. Every time CalPERS cuts the expected rate of return, a city needs to come up with a pot of money to put in to make up for the estimated decrease in return. And they're still very optimistic with the rate of return that they're predicting. And they've even said if we went to the actual rate of return we expect, there'd be a load of city bankruptcies because the cities just could not come up with the money to fund their pensions. But our pensions are pretty well funded right now. I think we're at 80%. Now, we had this embezzlement case where a former accountant in the city is accused of embezzling about $800,000. So that's moving forward with the district attorney. Unfortunately, the city, if she makes restitution, much of that money or all of it will go to the state because the money didn't come from our actual own money. It was deposits that people made when they were applying for permits, and whatever was left over after the project was complete should have been refunded to them, and instead she embezzled this money or is alleged to embezzle this money. So we are trying to recover it, but when we get it back, it's not clear if the city will be able to actually keep that money technically. It's like when the state holds dormant bank accounts for you. The state holds the money if you ask for it and can prove that it's yours, then they give it back to you. And this meeting I went to earlier this week, we also talked about how we can collaborate in the region on these business taxes. I know Mountain View just put it on the ballot, a business tax of about $150 maximum per employee, depending on the size of the company. But we really want to do something regionally. So a city says, hey, we imposed a business tax, and that other city didn't. Now all our companies are going to move to that other city. In reality, that doesn't happen that much. If it's a reasonable amount, nobody packs up and leaves just to save $150 per employee. But we're really going to need to move forward with that. This morning I was interviewed on Channel 2, and they asked me about property taxes, and I wasn't even aware of this. I knew Levi Stadium got a huge tax reduction from the county, and in fact the school district there is going to have to pay back all the money they've received since the stadium opened, and additionally lose about $1.5 to $2.5 million a year in revenue. And I found out from this report actually that Apple has applied for 489 property tax reductions at various buildings. And I don't know which buildings those are, but if those are granted, and it's actually fair if you think your property is overvalued that you apply for these reassessments. But if that money goes away, the cities that are receiving it are going to have to find ways to make up the shortfall. This was the embezzlement. I already talked about that. Another big issue we've been involved with lately is the cement plant. If anyone here lives up in the Monte Vista area, they've seen the nonstop trucking going between Stevens Creek Boulevard up to Stevens Creek, up to the quarry up on Stevens Canyon Road. And the reasons the trucks are there is because they can't use the illegal road that was built between the Lehigh Quarry and the Stevens Creek Quarry. So they're using the public roads, which is their right to do, but they're making this a big mess on the road, and the traffic is impacted heavily. But we have to be careful. We don't want to act too hastily. We don't want to say, go ahead and use the illegal road. We don't want the county to allow them to use that illegal road, because that's not solving the long-term problem. It's just moving it out of sight. For parks, we would love more public engagement on our master plan for parks. There were a couple of meetings that were not very well attended, and we're talking about spending a lot of money in the future on our parks and fixing them up, hopefully finding some more parkland for the east side of town, which is very park deficient. There's also questions, what should we do? Should we build a municipal swimming pool? Should we build a performing arts center? And all of these are really big ticket items. We need to know what the public thinks about us spending the money in this way. And finally, I was at a meeting recently and I said, don't parks have to be on the ground to qualify as parkland? And I was told no. There is no ordinance in the city that says a park needs to be on the ground. So you could put a park underwater, you can put it up in the sky, it would still be parkland. And I think most of us would prefer parks on the ground because they're accessible all the time. You don't need to take an elevator up to the top. I know San Jose recently entitled a park on top of an 18-story apartment building they're building on Winchester Avenue. And they said, oh, don't worry, the public can use it. They just need to find a place to park and then take the elevator to the roof, and they have this lovely park to use where it'll probably be really windy as well. So I'm an advocate of parks on the ground, and I hope we can move in that direction. And now, Valco. Has anyone heard of Valco? I was in the hospital a few months ago being wheeled into the operating room for a minor procedure, nothing serious, and the person rolling the gurney into the elevator, looking at my chart, and she says, hey, what's happening with Valco? I said, she ended up in the emergency room after that question. So here's a picture of Valco, what it used to be like. This is a parking lot where the 19800 is now. And actually, I don't know what's happening with Valco. They have several options now. The SB 35 project that was deemed compliant by the city, they could go forward and build that. There's some legal action taking place, but it hasn't put that project on hold. We don't know what the outcome is yet. A judge will have to be deciding the status of that lawsuit. They could wait for an election, and if the voters approve and uphold the ordinances and resolutions that the last council passed, then they could go ahead and build their Tier 2. Or they could come and offer a new specific plan if the ordinances and resolutions are rejected by voters or rescinded by the council. So the way that works, we can put it on the ballot. It'll probably be in 2020, the next general election, or the council has the option to say, hey, so many people signed this, maybe we should just rescind this. And there's advantages and disadvantages either way. You have to wait a year after an ordinance is rejected by voters or rescinded before you can come back with a similar plan. So if we wait till 2020 for an election and the property owner lost, they'd have to wait another year till 2021 before they could submit a new plan. This is a lot of really unnecessary delay in my view. Here's my tombstone. I don't know if you can read it. 1956 to 2056. I'm being optimistic that I'll live to 100. And what's happening with Valco, since that's the question I get asked. Now, I would like to see a new specific plan. I think we should have community engagement. I think the charrette process was terribly flawed. It didn't reflect what the community actually put into the plan. It wasn't that the community said they wanted Tier 2. It was totally different than what the community said. So we need community engagement. The city can fund it. We should not expect the property owner to fund it, because that tends to taint the results. So I think we can afford to fund something, and if the property owner will come to the table, we could move forward with something we could all agree with, because I think nobody likes to see a dead mall sitting there. We all agree that something should happen. We just don't want the wrong thing to happen. So legally, we've hired a firm called Shute, Mahaly, and Weinberger to serve as our city attorney instead of hiring a new city attorney. So they will be starting in about a week, and we'll have a dedicated person from their company on site, I think 24 hours a week. And we think this will be a more beneficial setup. They have a lot of expertise in a lot of areas. So things we're contracting out for now, they can bring in-house, and we'll be paying a much lower rate per hour if it's a service that's not covered by the regular contract for services. So we'll see how this works out. Hopefully it'll be good. If it doesn't work out in a year, we can always go back and look to hire another city attorney. And as far as our previous city attorney who's gone, we are still working through that situation. I can't say much about it, but hopefully we can find a good resolution to this and put this all behind us. It's a real time sink to have to deal with all these legal issues. So finally, I'm going to go through some of our commissions. I asked them each to send me some of their accomplishments over the past year. Some of them did, some of them didn't. Some of them I left out because they'd be too boring. Like, is Eno here? Eno's the head of our audit committee. And fortunately, those meetings are during the day, so you can stay awake. But since I'm not an accountant and I'm an engineer, a lot of the stuff in the meetings go right over my head. I just not sure what they're talking about. I picked up a lot, but it's still really hard to understand all that financial information. So on Bike Ped, I don't know if you've seen the wayfinding signs around Cupertino. Those have been installed. They're working on the Class 4 bike lane plan, the Regnart Creek Trail Study, which is moving forward, and they've also had an adult biking education class. I think that was over at Quinlan, or no, I think it was at the YMCA. I can't recall. The library commission has partnered with sustainability to present a speaker series on sustainability. They provide recommendations on the new patron survey, and their big accomplishment last year was not being disappeared. So they're still here. There was some proposal to eliminate it and merge it in with Parks and Rec, which in my opinion didn't have a lot of synergy, but fortunately they've survived and are moving forward. Public safety, they had the same issue. They avoided being disappeared. They've done a lot of good work. They did the PEP classes, the Alert SEC, they had a forum on domestic violence, and they do our annual public safety forum. The Planning Commission, they've been busy approving various projects, including short-term rental regulation proposals and 25 housing units at the Forum Retirement Community, which is up near Rancho San Antonio. They're building additional 25 units as well as more healthcare facilities. And that was a good example. They really collaborated with the local residents there and came up with a plan that they all could accept. They initially wanted a few more housing units. They decided it wouldn't be appropriate, and there was really no disagreement that they should be allowed to move forward with that expansion. Fine Arts they participated in the volunteer fair. They outreached to schools and artists. They did the utility boxes. I'm sure you've seen them around the city, the painted utility boxes. The kids seem to really enjoy looking at those, and they had some awards for various artists. Last year we had Cupertino. Did anyone here have kids that went to Cupertino? So that was, I think, Darcy, 500 teenagers showed up? 500 for free boba. So the slide on the left here says, if you can't read it, it says, rethink your Asian drink. I think once a year giving kids free boba is great. But I counted 39 boba places in Cupertino. If we could find a way to tax boba, we would solve all our financial problems in the city. We could build, oh, here we go. Wow, was this planned? Whose boba is this? What sweetness level is this? 50%, okay. So, hopefully our kids, if we expand library hours, they would spend more time at the library and less time at all the boba shops. Hopefully there's no boba shop owner here. And then a pet peeve of mine has been for a long time, our city council meetings. We have got to find a way to stop them going past midnight at least, at a minimum. So if you can see this slide here, this is a toy called the Fisher-Price Soul Crushing Meeting Kit. So it lets kids have their own soul-crushing meeting at home. I've asked our interim city manager, we really need to work on shortening staff presentations. I would like to see things like moving our council comments, which are now at the end of the meeting, which could be at 2 a.m., and everyone says, just forget it, I won't say what I've been doing for the past 2 weeks because everyone wants to go home and go to sleep. I'd like to move them up to the beginning of the meeting. It tells everybody what we've been doing for the past few weeks. We go to an enormous number of outside meetings as part of our roles, to VTA and library and water. And it's important information that we should be relaying to citizens, but unless they watch the video or stay till the very end of the meeting, they never hear our council reports. So that's one thing I'd like to do. So here's finally the last slide, the goals. I want to fix the inconsistencies in the general plan, address traffic, look into what we're going to have to do for capital expenditures, including the new city hall, if we can do that. Finish the park master plan. I don't think anyone likes seeing Memorial Park the way it's been for the past several years with those empty water features and just looking at the concrete there. We really need to get that fixed. We owe it to the residents. The Code of Ethics, which was kind of hastily passed, withdrawn. I mean, we're going to bring that back in a month or two. Somehow we survived in Cupertino for about 50-something years without a Code of Ethics. So for a couple of more weeks, I think we can be okay. We're already bound by all these FPPC rules anyway, the Fair Political Practices Commission. So we're trying to do the right thing here. And then finally, I mentioned the ELI housing units and working with the regional and state agencies to really assert the small cities' position on a lot of key issues that are coming forward from the state, from Sacramento. A lot of those could be really harmful for us, and we really need to address those and try to do some pushback. So I think that's all I have. So thank you for coming. And thank you for the boba. Does anybody want to buy this? Hey, Tim?
Thank you, Mayor. And in keeping with Stephen's direction to have short staff presentations, I'm just going to say good night and let's have a good year. Thank you.